Chapter 1: Shadows and Shovels. Arthur Croft had always been drawn to shadows, not the playful kind dancing on sunlit walls, but the deep, consuming shadows that clung to forgotten corners, the kind that seemed to breathe with a life of their own. It was a morbid fascination, some might say, but it was a comfort to him. He felt at home in the darkness, hidden from the judging eyes of a world that had never quite understood him. Which was why, perhaps, he found himself standing at the wrought iron gates of Silent Hollow Cemetery, a week shy of his 25th birthday, ready to start his new job as a gravedigger. Silent Hollow was a place of sprawling decay. Ancient oaks, gnarled with age, clawed at the sky, their branches heavy with Spanish moss that dripped like ghostly tears. Headstones, some dating back to the founding of the town, leaned at precarious angles, their inscriptions worn smooth by the relentless passage of time. Mausoleums, imposing structures of granite and marble, stood like silent sentinels, guarding the secrets of the families entombed within. Overgrowth reigned supreme. Ivy snaked its way across the graves, blurring the lines between life and death, between remembrance and oblivion. It was beautiful in a bleak, unsettling way. Arthur adjusted the worn strap of his satchel, the leather creaking in protest. Inside were the few possessions he deemed essential: a dog-eared copy of Edgar Allan Poe's complete works, a worn pocket knife, and a flask of strong black coffee. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, and pushed open the creaking gates. Silas, the groundskeeper, was waiting for him near the small, dilapidated office building. Silas was a man carved from granite and weathered by decades of sun and rain. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes were the color of faded denim, and his hands were gnarled and calloused from years of toil. He wore a faded green uniform that hung loosely on his frame, and a worn-out baseball cap that shielded his eyes from the glare of the setting sun. "You Arthur?" Silas asked, his voice raspy. "Yes, sir," Arthur replied, extending a hand. Silas took it in a grip that surprised Arthur with its strength. "Silas is the name. I'll show you the ropes. Not much to it, really. Dig holes, bury folks, keep the grass cut. The dead don't complain much, but the living sure do if their plots ain't kept up." Silas chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that echoed through the stillness of the cemetery. He gestured towards a shed overflowing with tools. "Your gear in there. Shovel, pickaxe, the usual. There's a mower, but it's seen better days. Try not to break it. I am too old to fix it again. First job is over near Blackwood Mausoleum. Family is particular. Wants it done by sundown tomorrow." The Blackwood Mausoleum. Arthur had seen it from the gates. It was the largest, most imposing structure in the entire cemetery, a testament to the wealth and power of the Blackwood family. He wondered what secrets it held. "All right," Arthur said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "I'll get right to it." Silas nodded, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Good lad. One thing you need to realize about Silent Hollow: it got secrets. Some folks don't like them dug up. Just remember that and you'll do fine." With that cryptic warning, Silas turned and shuffled away, leaving Arthur alone with the shadows and the weight of his new responsibilities. Arthur walked towards the shed, the crunch of gravel beneath his boots the only sound breaking the silence. He grabbed the shovel and pickaxe, their weight familiar and comforting in his hands. He had always found a strange solace in physical labor, in the rhythmic swing of the shovel, the satisfying thud of the pickaxe against the earth. It was a way to escape the thoughts that haunted him, the memories that clawed at his mind. As he approached the Blackwood Mausoleum, the air grew noticeably colder. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows that danced across the overgrown grounds, transforming familiar shapes into grotesque figures. The mausoleum loomed before him, a dark, forbidding structure of gray stone. Its heavy bronze doors were sealed shut, adorned with intricate carvings of weeping angels and skeletal figures. A sense of unease settled over him, a feeling of being watched. He found the designated plot a few yards away from the mausoleum. It was overgrown with weeds and thorns, as if nature itself was resisting the intrusion of civilization. Arthur took a deep breath and began to dig. The earth was hard and unforgiving. The shovel struck against rocks and roots, jarring his arms. Sweat beaded on his forehead and his muscles began to ache. But he pressed on, driven by a need to lose himself in the work, to silence the voices in his head. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the cemetery in an even deeper gloom, Arthur's shovel struck something solid. Not a rock, but something smoother, more uniform. He dropped to his knees and began to clear away the dirt with his hands. A stone slab. It was old, covered in moss and lichen, but he could make out faint carvings. Strange symbols, unlike anything he had ever seen. A chill ran down his spine. He had a feeling he was not supposed to find this. He hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. Should he leave it alone? Pretend he hadn't seen it? Silas's warning echoed in his ears. It got secrets. Some folks don't like them dug up. But curiosity, that relentless, gnawing force that had always driven him, won out. He grabbed the pickaxe and began to pry at the edges of the slab. It was heavier than he expected, and it took all his strength to lift it. With a final heave, the slab gave way, revealing a dark, gaping hole beneath. A rush of cold, stale air wafted up from the opening, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. Arthur peered into the darkness, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed his flashlight from his satchel and shined it into the hole. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a narrow stone staircase leading down into the earth. The steps were worn and uneven, covered in dust and cobwebs. He couldn't see how far down it went. His mind screamed at him to turn away, to seal the slab back up and forget he ever saw it. This was not his business. This was a secret that was meant to stay buried. But he couldn't. He was too far in. The darkness beckoned him, promising answers to questions he hadn't even known he had. He took another deep breath, steeling his nerves. "All right," he muttered to himself. "Let's see what you're hiding." He lowered himself into the hole, his boots finding purchase on the first step. He shined the flashlight down the staircase, illuminating the path ahead. It was dark, damp, and claustrophobic. He could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. He descended into the darkness, leaving the world above behind. He had a feeling that his life was about to change forever. Chapter 2: Echoes of the Past. The air grew colder and heavier with each step Arthur took. The beam of his flashlight danced across the damp stone walls, revealing grotesque carvings that seemed to writhe in the shadows. He saw depictions of skeletal figures, weeping angels, and strange, unidentifiable creatures. The craftsmanship was exquisite, but the subject matter was deeply disturbing. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was trespassing on sacred ground, that he was violating a space that was never meant to be disturbed. The staircase spiraled downwards, leading him deeper and deeper into the earth. The sound of dripping water grew louder, echoing through the narrow passage. He estimated that he had descended at least 20 feet when the staircase finally opened into a small, circular chamber. The chamber was dimly lit by a single flickering torch that was mounted on the wall. The torch cast dancing shadows that played tricks on his eyes, making it difficult to discern the details of the room. But as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he began to make out the features of the chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, filled with dusty tomes and strange artifacts. He saw glass jars containing preserved specimens, ancient-looking tools, and metal boxes adorned with intricate carvings. In the center of the room stood a large stone altar, stained with what appeared to be dried blood. A chill ran down his spine. This was not a place of peace or reverence. This was a place of dark rituals and forgotten secrets. He stepped cautiously into the chamber, his flashlight beam sweeping across the room. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay. He could hear a faint whispering sound, as if the walls themselves were trying to communicate with him. As he moved closer to the altar, he noticed something lying on its surface. It was a book, bound in black leather, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was blank, but as he reached out to touch it, a symbol appeared as if materializing from the leather itself. The same symbol he had seen on the stone slab above. He hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the book. He had a feeling that opening it would unleash something terrible, that it would drag him down a path from which there was no return. But the lure of the unknown was too strong to resist. He grasped the book and opened it. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language he did not recognize. The script was elegant but unsettling. The letters formed with sharp, jagged lines that seemed to claw at the eyes. Interspersed with the text were illustrations of bizarre rituals, grotesque creatures, and strange symbols. As he flipped through the pages, he felt a growing sense of dread. The book seemed to pulse with a dark energy, as if it were alive. He could hear the whispering sound growing louder, resonating within his own mind. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't have done that." Arthur whirled around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Standing in the doorway of the chamber was a figure cloaked in shadow. He could not make out any details, but he could sense the figure's presence, a cold, malevolent energy that filled the room. "Who are you?" Arthur demanded, his voice trembling slightly. The figure did not answer. It simply stepped forward, its shadow stretching across the chamber like a grasping hand. Arthur raised his flashlight, trying to illuminate the figure's face, but the light seemed to be swallowed by the darkness, revealing nothing. "Leave this place," the figure said, its voice a raspy whisper that seemed to scrape against Arthur's eardrums. "You don't belong here. You have no idea what you've stumbled upon." "I want to know what's going on," Arthur replied, his voice growing stronger. "What is this place? What is that book?" The figure chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. "You ask too many questions. Some things are better left buried." With that, the figure raised its hand, and the torch on the wall flickered and died, plunging the chamber into darkness. Arthur gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. He swung his flashlight wildly, trying to find the figure, but it was gone. He was alone in the darkness, surrounded by the echoes of the past. He stumbled backwards, knocking against one of the shelves. A glass jar toppled over, shattering on the floor. The contents of the jar spilled out, a viscous liquid that smelled of formaldehyde and something else, something vaguely organic and deeply disturbing. He shined his flashlight on the spill, revealing a grotesque shape lying amidst the broken glass. It was a human fetus, preserved in the jar, its features twisted into a silent scream. Arthur recoiled in horror, his stomach churning. What kind of monster would keep something like this? What kind of dark secrets were hidden within these walls? He knew then that he had to get out of there. He had stumbled upon something far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. He had to warn someone, to tell them what he had found. But as he turned to flee, he heard a sound behind him. A shuffling sound, like something dragging itself across the floor. He whirled around, his flashlight beam trembling in his hand. And there, standing in the shadows, was the figure again. But this time he could see it more clearly. It was an old man, gaunt and emaciated, with skin stretched tight over his bones. His eyes were sunken and black, filled with an unholy light. He wore a tattered black robe and his hands were gnarled and claw-like. He smiled, revealing a row of yellowed, broken teeth. "You can't leave," he whispered, his voice a dry, rattling sound. "You know too much." Arthur knew in that moment that his life was in danger. He had stumbled upon a secret that someone was willing to kill to protect, and he was trapped in the darkness, with no one to help him. Chapter 3: Beatrice and Blackwood's History. Panic seized Arthur, but he fought to suppress it. He knew that if he gave in to fear, he would be lost. He had to think, to find a way to escape. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "What do you want?" The old man chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the chamber. "I am the crypt keeper," he rasped, "and I want you to be silent." He took a step forward, and Arthur instinctively raised his flashlight, shining it in the crypt keeper's face. The crypt keeper hissed and recoiled, shielding his eyes with his hand. "Light," he hissed, "it burns." Arthur realized then that the crypt keeper was sensitive to light. It was a weakness he could exploit. He kept the flashlight trained on the crypt keeper, forcing him to shield his eyes. "Stay back," Arthur warned. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will defend myself." "You cannot harm me," the crypt keeper said, his voice filled with an unsettling confidence. "I am beyond such things. I am the guardian of this place, the keeper of its secrets, and I will not allow you to defile it." "Defile it?" Arthur scoffed. "This place is already defiled. What about that?" That thing in the jar. What kind of sick ritual are you performing down here? The crypt keeper's eyes narrowed. You know nothing of the ancient ways, he said, of the power that lies dormant within this earth. I am merely preserving it, protecting it from those who would misuse it. Misuse it, Arthur repeated. You're experimenting on human remains. You're desecrating the dead. The dead are merely vessels, the crypt keeper said. Empty shells waiting to be filled with new purpose. I am giving them that purpose. Arthur was disgusted. This man was insane. He had to get out of here to expose the crypt keeper's depravity to the world. He took a step back, keeping the flashlight trained on the crypt keeper. I'm leaving, he said, and I'm telling everyone what I found. You won't, the crypt keeper said, his voice suddenly devoid of emotion. Because you won't leave this place alive. With that, he lunged at Arthur, his claw-like hands outstretched. Arthur reacted instinctively, sidestepping the attack and swinging the flashlight like a club. The flashlight connected with the crypt keeper's head, and he cried out in pain, stumbling backwards. Arthur didn't wait. He turned and fled, running towards the staircase. He could hear the crypt keeper scrambling after him, his footsteps echoing through the chamber. Arthur scrambled up the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the crypt keeper gaining on him, his raspy breathing close behind. He reached the top of the staircase and heaved himself out of the hole, back into the fresh air of the cemetery. He didn't stop to catch his breath. He grabbed the stone slab and struggled to push it back into place, sealing the entrance to the chamber. He was exhausted, his muscles aching, his mind reeling. But he knew he couldn't rest. The crypt keeper was still down there, and he would find a way out. Arthur ran towards the cemetery gates, desperate to escape the nightmare he had stumbled into. As he ran, he noticed a figure standing near the Blackwood mausoleum. It was Beatrice Eldridge, the historian. He ran towards her, relief flooding his veins. "Beatrice," he shouted, "thank God you have to help me." Beatrice turned to face him, her eyes wide with concern. "Arthur, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I have," Arthur said, gasping for breath. "There's something down there beneath the Blackwood mausoleum, something terrible." He quickly recounted his experience, telling Beatrice about the hidden chamber, the book, the fetus in the jar, and the crypt keeper. Beatrice listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grim. When he was finished, she was silent for a moment, her brow furrowed in thought. "I believe you," she said finally. "I've heard rumors about the Blackwood family, whispers of dark secrets and forbidden rituals, but I never thought they were true." "What do you know about them?" Arthur asked. "The Blackwoods were one of the founding families of this town," Beatrice said. "They amassed a great fortune through shipping and trade, but they were also known for their eccentricities, their obsession with the occult, and their unusual practices." "Unusual practices," Arthur pressed. "What do you mean?" "There were rumors of blood sacrifices, of experiments with the dead, of pacts with dark entities," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The townsfolk whispered about them, and soon the Blackwood family moved from the town, and no one ever heard of them again." And the crypt keeper, Arthur asked. Who is he? Beatrice shook her head. I don't know, but if what you say is true, he must be a descendant of the Blackwood family, someone who is continuing their dark legacy. We have to do something, Arthur said. We have to stop him. I agree, Beatrice said, but we need to be careful. The Blackwoods were powerful, and their influence still lingers in this town. We can't trust anyone. Then what do we do? Arthur asked. Beatrice thought for a moment. I know someone who might be able to help us, she said. Someone who knows more about the Blackwoods than anyone else. Who? Arthur asked. Reverend Hawthorne, Beatrice said. He's the local priest. He's been studying the history of this town for years. If anyone knows the truth about the Blackwoods, it's him. All right, Arthur said. Let's go talk to him. Together, Arthur and Beatrice left the cemetery, determined to uncover the truth about the Blackwoods and put an end to the crypt keeper's reign of terror. But they had no idea that they were walking into a trap, that the darkness was closing in around them, and that the secrets of Silent Hollow were about to be revealed in all their horrifying glory. Chapter 4: Whispers in the Confessional. The rectory was a small, unassuming building next to the town's quaint, white-steepled church. A light flickered in one of the windows, offering a beacon of hope in the gathering gloom. Arthur and Beatrice approached cautiously, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them. Beatrice knocked on the door, the sound echoing through the silent night. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Reverend Hawthorne. He was a tall, thin man with a kind face and weary eyes. He wore a simple black cassock, and a silver cross hung around his neck. Beatrice, he said, his voice soft and gentle, what brings you here so late? Reverend, Beatrice said, we need to talk to you. It's about the Blackwood family. Reverend Hawthorne's face paled. The Blackwoods, what about them? We think they're still here, Arthur interjected, or at least their legacy is. He quickly recounted his experience in the cemetery, telling Reverend Hawthorne about the hidden chamber, the book, the fetus in the jar, and the crypt keeper. Reverend Hawthorne listened intently, his expression growing increasingly disturbed. When Arthur was finished, he was silent for a long moment, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. I had hoped those stories were just that, stories, he said finally. But I fear you have stumbled upon something very real, something very dark. You know about the Blackwoods then? Beatrice asked. Reverend Hawthorne nodded. I do. I've been researching their history for years. They were a powerful family, but they were also deeply troubled. They dabbled in things they shouldn't have, things that defied the laws of God and man. What kind of things? Arthur asked. Reverend Hawthorne hesitated for a moment, as if reluctant to speak the words aloud. They were rumored to have practiced dark magic, to have made pacts with demons, to have sacrificed human lives in their pursuit of power. Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. This was even worse than he had imagined. Is that book I found? Is it connected to them? He asked. Reverend Hawthorne nodded. It sounds like the Grimoire Blackwood, a collection of spells and rituals that was said to have been passed down through generations of the Blackwood family. It was believed to contain secrets of immense power, but also of unimaginable evil. And the crypt keeper, Beatrice asked, "Who is he?" "I don't know," Reverend Hawthorne said, "but he must be a descendant of the Blackwoods, someone who has inherited their dark legacy and is determined to continue their work." "We have to stop him," Arthur said. "He's experimenting on human remains, desecrating the dead. He's a monster." "I agree," Reverend Hawthorne said, "but we must be careful. The Blackwoods were cunning and ruthless. They have laid traps for those who would oppose them." "What do you suggest we do?" Beatrice asked. Reverend Hawthorne thought for a moment. "The grimoire Blackwood is the key," he said. "It contains the secrets of their power, but also the means to defeat them. We need to find a way to destroy it." "But how?" Arthur asked. "It's locked away in that hidden chamber, guarded by the crypt keeper." "There may be another way," Reverend Hawthorne said. "According to legend, there is a hidden ritual, a counterspell that can negate the grimoire's power. But it requires a sacrifice of something pure and innocent." Arthur and Beatrice exchanged a worried glance. "What kind of sacrifice?" Beatrice asked. "I don't know the specifics," Reverend Hawthorne said. "The details have been lost to time. But I do know that it must be something of great value, something that the Blackwoods held dear." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from inside the church. The three of them jumped, startled. "What was that?" Arthur asked. Reverend Hawthorne's face paled. "I don't know," he said, "but I have a feeling we're about to find out." He grabbed a crucifix from the wall and held it aloft. "Stay behind me," he said, "and pray for guidance." He cautiously opened the door to the church, and the three of them stepped inside. The interior of the church was dark and silent. The only light came from the flickering candles on the altar. As they moved further into the church, they heard a faint whispering sound, as if the walls themselves were trying to communicate with them. The air grew cold, and a sense of unease settled over them. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Silas, the groundskeeper, but something was different about him. His eyes were glazed over, his face was contorted in a grotesque grin, and he was carrying a shovel in his hand. "Silas," Arthur said, his voice filled with disbelief, "what are you doing here?" Silas didn't answer. He simply raised the shovel and charged at them, his eyes filled with an unholy light. "He's been possessed," Reverend Hawthorne cried. "Defend yourselves." Reverend Hawthorne raised his crucifix and began to chant in Latin. Silas recoiled, hissing like a cornered animal. Arthur grabbed a candelabra from the altar and swung it at Silas, knocking him off balance. Silas stumbled backwards, dropping the shovel. Beatrice grabbed the shovel and raised it above her head, ready to strike. But as she did, Silas lunged at her, grabbing her by the throat. Beatrice gasped for air, her face turning red. Arthur rushed to her aid, grabbing Silas by the arm and pulling him away. Silas turned his attention to Arthur, his eyes filled with rage. He grabbed Arthur by the throat, squeezing tightly. Arthur struggled to breathe, his vision blurring. He felt himself losing consciousness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the shade of Eliza Blackwood, her spectral form shimmering in the darkness. The shade of Eliza Blackwood screamed, a banshee wail that echoed through the church. Silas recoiled in terror, releasing Arthur and stumbling backwards. The shade of Eliza Blackwood turned her attention to Silas, her eyes burning with righteous fury. She reached out her spectral hand and touched him, and Silas screamed in agony, his body writhing in pain. After a moment, Silas fell to the ground, unconscious. The shade of Eliza Blackwood turned to Arthur and Beatrice, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Leave this place," she whispered. "The darkness is growing stronger. You are not safe here." And with that, she faded away, disappearing back into the shadows. Arthur and Beatrice stared at Silas's unconscious form, their minds reeling. They had been attacked, possessed, and saved by a ghost. They knew then that they were dealing with forces far beyond their understanding. "We have to go," Arthur said, his voice trembling. "The shade is right. We're not safe here." Reverend Hawthorne nodded in agreement. "But where do we go?" he asked. "Where can we be safe?" Arthur thought for a moment. "There's one place," he said, "a place where the Blackwoods' influence is weak, a place where we might be able to find answers." "Where?" Beatrice asked. "The old Blackwood estate," Arthur said. "It's abandoned, but it's said to be haunted. If we can find anything there, maybe we can use it against the Crypt Keeper." Reverend Hawthorne nodded. "It's a risk," he said, "but it's a risk we have to take." Together, Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne left the church, leaving Silas's unconscious form behind. They were heading into the heart of the darkness, to a place where the Blackwoods' secrets were buried deep. But they were determined to uncover the truth, even if it meant risking their lives. The whispers in the confessional had warned them, but their resolve only deepened. Chapter 5: Eldridge Estate. The Blackwood estate stood on a hill overlooking the town, a crumbling monument to a family's faded glory. The mansion itself was a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone and shadowed windows, its turrets and gables silhouetted against the moonlit sky. A wrought iron fence, rusted and overgrown with vines, surrounded the property, giving it an air of forbidding isolation. Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne approached cautiously, their senses on high alert. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the silence was broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. "This place gives me the creeps," Beatrice whispered, clutching her coat tighter around her. "It's meant to," Arthur replied. "The Blackwoods wanted to keep people away." "Do you think the Crypt Keeper is here?" Reverend Hawthorne asked, his hand gripping his crucifix. "I don't know," Arthur said, "but we have to be prepared for anything." They found a break in the fence and slipped through, their footsteps crunching on the overgrown gravel driveway. As they approached the mansion, the shadows seemed to deepen, and the wind picked up, whispering through the broken windows. The front door was partially open, hanging crookedly on its hinges. Arthur pushed it open further, revealing a dark and cavernous foyer. The air inside was stale and musty, filled with the scent of mold and dust. "Hello," Arthur called out, his voice echoing through the empty mansion. "Is anyone there?" There was no response. "Let's stick together," Reverend Hawthorne said, "and be careful." They stepped inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The foyer was dominated by a grand staircase that led to the upper floors. Cobwebs hung like ghostly shrouds from the ornate chandelier, and portraits of stern-faced Blackwood ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow them as they moved. "This place is a wreck," Beatrice said, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been abandoned for decades," Arthur replied, "but there might still be something here that can help us." They began to explore the mansion, room by room. The library was filled with dusty books and decaying furniture, the pages of the books crumbling to the touch. The dining room was set for a feast that never happened, the silverware tarnished and the plates covered in cobwebs. The bedrooms were filled with decaying clothes and forgotten toys, remnants of a life that had long since vanished. As they moved through the mansion, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The shadows seemed to shift and move, and they could hear faint whispers on the wind. "Did you hear that?" Beatrice asked, stopping suddenly. "Hear what?" Arthur replied. "I thought I heard someone whispering," she said. "It's probably just the wind," Reverend Hawthorne said, trying to reassure her. But Arthur wasn't so sure. He had a feeling that they weren't alone in the mansion. They continued their search, moving deeper into the mansion. They reached a locked door at the end of a long hallway. The door was made of heavy oak, reinforced with iron bands. "This looks promising," Arthur said. "What do you think is behind it?" "There's only one way to find out," Beatrice said. Arthur tried the handle, but the door was locked tight. He took out his pocket knife and began to pick the lock. After a few minutes of painstaking work, the lock clicked open. He pushed open the door, revealing a dark and narrow staircase leading down into the basement. The air coming from the basement was cold and damp, carrying with it the scent of earth and decay. "This is it," Arthur said. "This is where the Blackwoods kept their secrets." They descended the staircase, their flashlights illuminating the path ahead. The basement was a labyrinth of stone corridors and vaulted chambers. The walls were lined with shelves filled with strange artifacts, instruments, and dusty tomes. As they moved through the basement, they began to hear a faint chanting sound, coming from the depths of the earth. "What is that?" Beatrice whispered, her face pale. "I don't know," Arthur said, "but I don't like it." They followed the sound, moving deeper into the basement. They reached a large, circular chamber. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, stained with what appeared to be dried blood. Around the altar stood a group of figures cloaked in shadow, chanting in a language they did not recognize. Arthur recognized one of the figures. It was the crypt keeper. "We have to stop them," Arthur said. "They're performing some kind of ritual." "But how?" Beatrice asked. "There are too many of them." "We have to find a way to disrupt the ritual," Reverend Hawthorne said, "to break their concentration." He raised his crucifix and began to chant in Latin. The cloaked figures paused in their chanting, turning to face them. The crypt keeper stepped forward, his eyes burning with rage. "You fools," he cried. "You have interrupted our sacred rite. Now you will pay the price." He gestured to the other figures, and they began to advance towards them. their eyes filled with an unholy light. Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne stood their ground, ready to face whatever horrors the Blackwoods had unleashed. The chanting grew louder, the shadows deepened, and the air crackled with dark energy. The fate of the town, and perhaps the world, hung in the balance. Arthur grasped the significance of the grimoire, understanding it was more than just a book. It was the tether to something sinister. Chapter 6: The Grimoire's Whisper. The cloaked figures surged forward, their chanting intensifying. Reverend Hawthorne met them head-on, brandishing his crucifix and reciting prayers in Latin. His voice, though filled with conviction, trembled slightly against the rising tide of the ritual's power. Arthur and Beatrice stood beside him, ready to fight but acutely aware of their vulnerability. They were facing not just flesh and blood, but something far more sinister, fueled by ancient, malevolent energy. Arthur scanned the chamber, desperate for anything that could give them an edge. His gaze fell upon the altar, its surface slick with old blood. He remembered Reverend Hawthorne's words about a counterspell, a ritual to negate the grimoire's power, requiring a sacrifice of something pure and innocent. He didn't know the specifics, but he knew they had to try something. "Beatrice with me," he shouted, dodging a lunging figure. "Reverend, keep them busy." He grabbed Beatrice's hand and pulled her towards the altar. The cloaked figures, momentarily distracted by Reverend Hawthorne's fervent prayers, hesitated, giving them a precious few seconds. As they reached the altar, Arthur noticed a small, silver locket lying on its surface, nestled amongst the bloodstains. It was intricately crafted, depicting a pair of intertwined roses. He picked it up, a strange feeling washing over him. It felt warm to the touch, as if it were still imbued with the life of its owner. "What is it?" Beatrice asked, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," Arthur said, "but I think it might be what we need." He opened the locket. Inside were two tiny portraits, faded with age. One was of a young woman with bright, smiling eyes. The other was of a little girl with the same sparkling gaze. A wave of sadness washed over Arthur. He sensed a deep connection between these two souls, a bond of love and innocence. Suddenly, the chanting intensified and the ground began to tremble. The cloaked figures were closing in, their eyes glowing with an unholy light. The crypt keeper raised his hands, and a bolt of dark energy shot towards them. "Now," Arthur shouted. He held the locket aloft, closing his eyes and focusing all his energy on the images within. He pictured the young woman and the little girl, their love, their joy, their innocence. He poured all his hope, all his faith into the locket, praying for a miracle. A surge of energy coursed through him, and the locket began to glow with a soft, white light. The light intensified, growing brighter and brighter, until it filled the entire chamber. The chanting stopped abruptly. The cloaked figures recoiled, shielding their eyes from the light. The crypt keeper screamed in agony, his body convulsing as the light washed over him. The ground stopped trembling, and the dark energy that had filled the chamber began to dissipate. The white light intensified, pushing back the shadows, banishing the darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded away. The locket fell from Arthur's hand, clattering to the stone floor. The chamber was silent. The cloaked figures were gone. The crypt keeper lay groaning on the ground, his body weakened and diminished. Arthur opened his eyes, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked at Beatrice, who was staring at him in disbelief. "What happened?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Arthur said, "but I think we stopped them." Reverend Hawthorne approached, his face etched with relief. "Thank God," he said. "I thought we were lost." He looked at the crypt keeper, who was struggling to sit up. "It's over," he said. "Your reign of terror is finished." The crypt keeper looked up at them, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won," he rasped. "The darkness will return. It always does." "Not if we can help it," Arthur said. He stepped forward and grabbed the crypt keeper by the collar, pulling him to his feet. "Tell us everything," he demanded. "What were you trying to do? What is the grimoire?" The crypt keeper hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "It's no use," he said. "You'll find out eventually." He began to tell them the story of the Blackwood family, their obsession with the occult, and their attempts to unlock the secrets of immortality. He told them about the grimoire, a book filled with spells and rituals that could grant unimaginable power, but at a terrible cost. He told them about the ritual they had been performing, a ritual to open a gateway to another dimension, a dimension filled with dark entities that could grant them eternal life. "We were so close," he said, his voice filled with regret. "So close to achieving our goal." "Your goal was madness," Reverend Hawthorne said. "You were willing to sacrifice innocent lives for your own selfish desires." "They were not innocent," the crypt keeper said. "They were vessels, tools to be used for a greater purpose." Arthur was disgusted by his words. "You're a monster," he said. "You deserve to be punished." "Punishment is irrelevant," the crypt keeper said. "I will soon die, but the grimoire still exists, and someone else will come along, someone who will be willing to pay the price for its power." Arthur realized then that they couldn't just stop the crypt keeper. They had to destroy the grimoire to ensure that its power could never be used again. "Where is it?" he demanded. "Where is the grimoire Blackwood?" The crypt keeper smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "That," he said, "is a secret I will take to my grave." He paused and whispered, "or to my crypt." Chapter 7: Eliza's Guidance. The crypt keeper's refusal to reveal the grimoire's location left Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne at a standstill. They had stopped the ritual and apprehended the immediate threat, but the source of the evil, the grimoire Blackwood, remained a looming danger. "We can't just leave it at that," Arthur said, frustration lacing his voice. "He's right, someone else will come looking for it. We have to destroy it." "But how do we find it?" Beatrice asked, packing the chamber. "We've searched this entire estate, and there's no sign of it." Reverend Hawthorne ran a hand through his thinning hair, his brow furrowed in thought. "Perhaps there's something we've overlooked," he said. "Something the crypt keeper didn't tell us." An idea sparked in Arthur's mind. "What about the shade of Eliza Blackwood?" he said. "She helped us before. Maybe she knows where the grimoire is hidden." "It's worth a try," Beatrice said. "But how do we summon her?" "I'm not sure," Arthur said. "But maybe if we go to her grave, she'll appear." They led the weakened crypt keeper, bound and gagged, to a secluded corner of the basement and left him under guard. Then, they made their way back to the cemetery, the moon casting long, eerie shadows across the headstones. They found Eliza Blackwood's grave, a simple stone marker overgrown with ivy. The air around it felt cold, and a sense of sadness permeated the space. Arthur knelt before the grave, closing his eyes and focusing his thoughts on Eliza. He pictured her spectral form, her sorrowful eyes, her desperate plea for peace. "Eliza," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need your help. We're trying to destroy the grimoire Blackwood, but we don't know where it is. Can you guide us?" A gust of wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the trees and swirling around them. The air grew colder, and a faint, ethereal glow emanated from Eliza's grave. The shade of Eliza Blackwood materialized before them, her spectral form shimmering in the moonlight. Her eyes were filled with a deep sadness, but there was also a glimmer of hope in them. "You seek to destroy the grimoire?" she asked, her voice a soft, mournful whisper. "Yes," Arthur said. "It's the source of all this evil. We have to stop it." "It is a dangerous path you tread," Eliza said. "The grimoire is protected by powerful magic, but if you are determined, I will help you." "Do you know where it is hidden?" Beatrice asked. Eliza nodded. "It is hidden in the family crypt beneath the Blackwood mausoleum, but it is not easily accessed. The entrance is concealed, and the path is guarded by ancient spirits." "Can you show us the way?" Arthur asked. Eliza hesitated for a moment. "I can guide you to the entrance," she said, "but I cannot enter the crypt. My spirit is bound to this cemetery. You must face the dangers within on your own." "We understand," Reverend Hawthorne said. "We are grateful for your help." Eliza turned and glided towards the Blackwood mausoleum, her spectral form leading them through the overgrown grounds. They followed her, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they reached the mausoleum, Eliza stopped before a section of the stone wall. She reached out her spectral hand and touched the wall, and a section of the stone slid away, revealing a narrow opening. "This is the entrance," she said. "Be warned, the path ahead is fraught with danger, but if you succeed in destroying the grimoire, you will bring peace to this land and to my soul." She looked at Arthur, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, "for trying to end this curse." Then she faded away, disappearing back into the shadows. Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne stared at the opening in the wall, their minds filled with trepidation. They knew that they were about to face the greatest challenge of their lives. "Are you ready?" Arthur asked, turning to his companions. Beatrice and Reverend Hawthorne nodded, their faces grim but determined. "Then let's do it," Arthur said. He took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, Beatrice and Reverend Hawthorne following close behind. The grimoire Blackwood awaited them, and they were ready to face whatever horrors lay in store. Chapter 8: Within the Crypt. The opening in the mausoleum wall led to a narrow, winding passage that descended steeply into the earth. The air grew thick and heavy, laden with the scent of decay and the oppressive weight of centuries of secrets. Arthur led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness, revealing damp stone walls and cobwebs thick as shrouds. "This place is suffocating," Beatrice whispered, her voice echoing eerily in the confined space. "Just keep moving," Arthur replied, trying to sound more confident than he felt. As they descended further, they began to hear faint whispers carried on the stale air. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, murmuring unintelligible words that sent shivers down their spines. "What is that sound?" Beatrice asked, her eyes wide with fear. "It's the spirits Eliza warned us about," Reverend Hawthorne said, his hand gripping his crucifix. "They're trying to scare us away." "They'll have to try harder than that," Arthur said, his jaw set. They pressed on, ignoring the whispers, their determination fueled by the knowledge that they were close to their goal. The passage opened into a large chamber, its walls lined with stone sarcophagi. The air in the chamber was cold and still, as if time itself had stopped within its walls. In the center of the chamber stood a large, ornate sarcophagus, its lid adorned with carvings of skeletal figures and grotesque demons. Arthur knew, without a doubt, that this was where the grimoire Blackwood was hidden. "This is it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The grimoire is in that sarcophagus." They approached the sarcophagus cautiously, their flashlights trained on its surface. As they drew closer, the whispers grew louder, swirling around them like a vortex. Suddenly, the sarcophagi lining the walls began to shake. The lids slid open, revealing the skeletal remains of the Blackwood ancestors. The skeletons rose from their resting places, their bones rattling and their eyes glowing with an unholy light. "They're guarding the grimoire," Reverend Hawthorne said, his voice trembling. "We have to defeat them." The skeletons lunged at them, their bony hands reaching out to grab them. Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne fought back with all their might, using their flashlights as weapons. Arthur smashed his flashlight against a skeleton's skull, shattering it into pieces. The skeleton collapsed to the ground, its bones scattering across the floor. Beatrice kicked another skeleton in the legs, sending it tumbling backwards into its sarcophagus. She slammed the lid shut, trapping the skeleton inside. Reverend Hawthorne held aloft his crucifix and began to chant in Latin. The skeletons recoiled from the crucifix, hissing and groaning in pain. They fought valiantly, but there were too many skeletons. They were slowly being overwhelmed. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the doorway of the chamber. It was the crypt keeper, his body battered and bruised, but his eyes still burning with hatred. "You fools," he cried. "You thought you could defeat me. The grimoire is mine, and I will not let you take it." He raised his hands, and the skeletons redoubled their efforts, attacking with renewed ferocity. Arthur realized that they were doomed. They couldn't defeat the skeletons and the crypt keeper at the same time. But then an idea sparked in his mind. He remembered the silver locket, the one that had saved them from the ritual. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, holding it aloft. "Eliza," he cried, "we need your help again. We can't do this alone." A surge of energy coursed through him, and the locket began to glow with a soft, white light. The light intensified, growing brighter and brighter until it filled the entire chamber. The skeletons recoiled from the light, their bones crumbling to dust. The crypt keeper screamed in agony, his body convulsing as the light washed over him. The white light intensified, pushing back the shadows, banishing the darkness. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the light faded away. The skeletons were gone. The crypt keeper lay groaning on the ground, his body weakened and diminished. Arthur turned to the ornate sarcophagus in the center of the chamber. He knew that the grimoire Blackwood was inside, waiting to be destroyed. He approached the sarcophagus cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out his hand and touched the lid, feeling the cold, smooth stone beneath his fingers. He took a deep breath and heaved the lid open. Inside the sarcophagus lay the grimoire Blackwood. It was a large, leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. The cover was adorned with intricate carvings of demons and grotesque creatures. Arthur reached out and picked up the grimoire. It felt heavy in his hands, as if it were filled with the weight of centuries of evil. He opened the book, and the whispers grew louder, swirling around him like a vortex. The pages were filled with handwritten text in a language he did not recognize, interspersed with illustrations of bizarre rituals and grotesque creatures. Arthur knew that he had to destroy the grimoire to erase its power from the world. But how? He looked at Reverend Hawthorne, seeking guidance. Reverend Hawthorne nodded, his eyes filled with determination. "There is only one way," he said. "We must burn it." Arthur nodded in agreement. He knew that burning the grimoire was the only way to ensure that its power could never be used again. He looked around the chamber, searching for something to start a fire. He found a pile of old, dry leaves in a corner of the chamber. He gathered the leaves together and placed them on the stone floor. He took out his pocket knife and struck a flint, creating a spark. The spark ignited the leaves, and a small fire began to burn. Arthur carefully placed the grimoire Blackwood on the fire. The flames licked at the leather cover, consuming the book page by page. As the grimoire burned, the whispers grew louder, more intense. The air crackled with dark energy. The chamber shook, as if the earth itself was protesting the destruction of the book. But Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne stood their ground, watching as the grimoire Blackwood was consumed by the flames. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the fire died down. The grimoire Blackwood was gone, reduced to ashes. The whispers faded away. The air grew still. The chamber was silent. The evil was gone. Arthur, Beatrice, and Reverend Hawthorne stood in the silence, their bodies trembling with exhaustion, their minds filled with relief. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged victorious. They had destroyed the grimoire Blackwood, and they had brought peace to Silent Hollow. They knew that the world would never be the same. They had seen things that no one should ever see, and they had faced horrors that no one should ever face. But they had also learned something valuable. They had learned that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And they had learned that even the most powerful evil can be defeated if people are willing to stand together and fight for what is right. They left the crypt, leaving the ashes of the grimoire Blackwood behind. As they emerged from the mausoleum, the sun began to rise, casting a warm, golden light across the cemetery. The cemetery was no longer a place of fear and darkness. It was a place of peace and tranquility, a place where the dead could rest in peace, and where the living could remember them with love and respect. Arthur looked at Beatrice and Reverend Hawthorne, his heart filled with gratitude. They had been through so much together, and they had emerged stronger and more resilient. "What do we do now?" Beatrice asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Arthur smiled. "Now," he said, "we go home." The end.